Normally I don't do a sermon that references Dr. Seuss, but hey, this is the first time for everything. And today, the title of today's lesson is Bible Time Grinch. And, okay, I'm not going to go in the same direction with my sermon as I went in the bulletin. I had a friend who really liked the Grinch for all the wrong reasons. And we're going to look at some of the wrong reasons actually in the passage we're covering today in Mark chapter 14. Because in the story of Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, you've got a Grinch and he's got a pretty nasty attitude about things. And we see that right off the bat in Mark 14, 1 and 2. After 2 days, it was the Passover, and the feast of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. And that word, trickery, that's not usually a good thing. I mean, okay, when a good person tells the truth to a bad person, and the bad person decides, aha, they're trying to deceive me because they would never tell me the truth. Well, that's all on the bad person's side. But when it comes to trickery, the first word we associate with that is deceit. And that's not a thing we're comfortable with, and we shouldn't be. Hang on to that thought, because it comes into play later on. Remember how we think about trickery. So when we jump down then to verse 3, and then being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, he sat at the table. A woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. And one of the things we need to keep in mind is Jesus has already told his followers at least 3 times he's coming to face his death, that this is it. And the things he said most recently lets them know that this is it is now. So what she is doing for him is in recognition of this is one of the last chances to act. 4 and 5 say, but there were some who were indignant amongst themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they criticized her sharply. They didn't just think it. They opened their mouths and complained. And okay, 300 denarii. That's about an entire year's set of wages. And pick your salary. I don't care if you're only making $20,000. $20,000 is a lot to give up in just one moment of time, let alone if you're making 40, 50, 60, 100, whatever. That's not chump change. That's serious. But there's another couple of seriouses going on here. The first serious we've got is we actually know who this woman is. We know that from John chapter 12, verse 3. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. This is Mary of Mary, Martha, Lazarus. Jesus raised her brother from the dead. And okay, let's add another fun level to this. The 2 most knowledgeable people we see during the life of Jesus who actually communicate their understanding are Mary and Martha. Martha's the one who, when Jesus comes after Lazarus has died, acknowledges, you are the resurrection. In the final day, my brother's going to rise. And it's going to be because of you. She got it. Mary also gets it and communicates a similar kind of understanding about Jesus, about him being the Son of God. She gets it. She gets it in such a way that she realizes he's going, and I don't know what happens next. She does everything she can in that respect to show honor and reverence. And the fact that somebody was so petty to complain about the cost, a cost they weren't paying. And if we think about Calvary's cross, a cost we don't pay. But, okay, there's a second hidden level to all of what's going on. This isn't the first time this has happened. The first time it happens is much earlier in Jesus' ministry. And if we go to Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 39, we find a totally different person. Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner. I'm sorry, I must have mistyped my part. I'm sorry, my brain's not working here. Let me just read through that again. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil and stood at his feet behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." Like I said, it happens twice. This is the first time. This happens early on in his ministry. The action that Mary does, in some people's eyes, would have put her in the exact same boat as this woman who was a sinner. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. The woman who was a sinner did all she could do to show her own feelings of remorse over the life she had lived, in the presence of one who had healed, who had raised people from the dead, who had fed people, who had shown compassion by touching the untouchable, whether that be the physically untouchable because they've got leprosy, or the spiritually untouchable, the tax collectors, the prostitutes. He let them know God was concerned just as much about them getting their lives turned around as he was the rest of Israel. God's offer of hope and salvation was to all. That first woman realized what she was receiving and was as thankful as she could be. Mary realized who he was as well and was answering as loud as she could the same way. Sometimes we get trapped in how we look at the situation. And we need to be careful. Because one could say, oh, wow, look what Mary's doing. Same thing as wrong answer. Look at what Mary's doing that none of us are doing. That would be a righter answer. Mary was going beyond the extra mile in her effort to show her respect, love, and reverence for Jesus and the things that he had already done. And okay, let's talk about Jesus. And this is a passage we're all very familiar with. John 1 through 4. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. How big are we talking? Huge big. You can't put a price tag on that huge. Mary did the best she could. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. And without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life. The life was the light of men. And when we hear that first part, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The simplest way to think about that is some hot wax in a coin. You put a coin down in hot wax, you let it chill. When you break that wax apart, it's got the exact image of the coin. It doesn't look like a cow, because that's not what it was impressed by. It doesn't look like a squirrel, because that's not what it was impressed by. The image it bears is the only image it was exposed to when it was cooling, and that was the coin. Before coming down to this world, Jesus bore the image of the Father, because that was what he was impressed upon by from back before the beginning of this world. So when it talks about when you know me, you know the Father later on in John, it's because we get to see the Father through the Son. Just like if you looked at that piece of wax after the coin is out, it still looks exactly like the coin as far as the image that it bears. So in the beginning, no. When he came bearing that same image, showing that same God, the love, the grace, the mercy, because that's what he knew before he came down here and was with us. And if we jump down a little bit farther in John 1, he was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And the Word became flesh. That's one people have another problem with. Because when we think about it, we can think about it just like putting on a mask. At Halloween, holiday we've already passed by, you don't become Batman, you put on the mask and the costume of Batman. You get to look like Batman, but you're so not Batman. Because all you did is look like. It says here, the Word became flesh. And okay, this is going to sound extreme, but if any one of us, we'll use me because I'm up here and you can see me, all of a sudden became a hamster, what am I going to be able to do as a hamster? Am I going to be able to draw my 60-pound bow? No, I'm going to have some problems. Number one, as a hamster, I don't have the strength to draw a 60-pound bow. Problem number two, my itty-bitty arms aren't going to be long enough to touch the handle and the string, let alone draw it. Problem number three, my hands or paws aren't made to draw it or hold the front of the bow. There's a whole lot I can't do when I become a hamster. Oh, left out the biggie. My brain right now is bigger than a hamster. Shrink me down to hamster size and give me a hamster brain, I can't process the stuff I can process right now. When Jesus became like us, he took on all those same kind of limitations. Then when we talk about us becoming a hamster, that sounds crazy and off the charts. We need to understand what Jesus did in becoming like us is so far off the chart. He took on all those limitations. And okay, there's another passage that puts this a bit farther. We got two to go through on this. The first one's in Luke 22:37. And it says, "For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me," and it's Jesus that's speaking, "and he will be numbered with the transgressors. For the things concerning me have an end, numbered with, not as if, but with. That means all the guilty who are gonna die, he stood with the guilty. It wasn't a head count, well, we'll count him too, even though he's pure and innocent and he doesn't have to worry about it. Not as if, with. So remember becoming that hamster, taking it all on? He took it all on, numbered with. How do we get out of this world? With God's grace and mercy. How did he get out of this world? With the Father's grace and mercy. Remember, how hard is it to conceive of that hamster becoming, or me becoming that hamster? Real hard, because who's going to give up all the abilities I've got? Okay, you've got. Doesn't matter who's got them, but we're giving up a lot to go down to that itty bitty. He didn't just give up a lot, he took on the same state that we're in. Without God's mercy, God's grace, he was numbered with us as though he were one of us, because he stood with. He took on a lot, including the burden. Philippians 2, 5 through 11, and I'm going to pause a couple times in this. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself. Remember that word trickery, okay? Because if I have $1 trillion, and boy would I love that, and I emptied myself of all of my wealth, is it okay that I hang on to a couple million? No, because that's not emptying myself. But compared to $1 trillion, $1 million's not even 1,000th of it. I'm hanging on to next to nothing. Who here wouldn't like to have the millions? Exactly. That's not empty. He emptied himself. He went full hamster. He gave it all up. Took on all the restraints and confines of being like us. That's a huge give. That's part of what he gave when it says, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Jesus doesn't magically become regodified when he leaves this world. He became as one of us. To be counted with us. How he makes it out of the world is how we make it out of the world. In fact, as it even tells us, we have that assurance. As he rose, so will we. And in heaven, what are we? Co-heirs with him. Anybody here think they become God when they are resurrected? My hand's not up because I'm claiming that. I'm going to be like Jesus. Jesus isn't going to become God again. Not like he was before. You get that? Going full hamster made a huge, huge permanent difference. And yet, being what he was before wasn't something to be grasped. Because of what he would be eternally was still so far better than anything we would have to look forward without him. Continuing on, verse 8, or just before verse 8, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men and being found in appearance as man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. And okay, this is part of where people get a bit confused, because likeness. I can tell you one difference, and that one difference doesn't bust his humanness. One difference between Jesus and the rest of us. He didn't choose for his desires over the will of the Father. And that's all the difference it takes. He didn't give in, give up. That one difference is what made him worthy. That one difference makes him the pure, the innocent, that can qualify to be the sacrifice for our sin. That pure, that innocent made him qualified to be not only the sacrifice, but the substitute for each and every one of us. Because each and every one of us deserved death. He experienced death as we will experience it. Because guess what? I've already said this before. He doesn't raise himself from the dead. The Father commands it, the Spirit does it. He rose the same way we will. That's an assurance. That should give us comfort to know he was willing to face it all the way that we will. There wasn't a trick involved. There was the grace, love, and mercy of the Father all the way. Verse 9, therefore, because he emptied, because he stands with us, therefore, God highly exalted him because he didn't give in. He remained true to his original form, the one he was impressed upon when he was with the Father. He chose to suffer, not because he wanted to suffer, but because that was the will of the Father, that the price be paid. He accepted that and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. In the story of the Grinch, in one moment in time, a choice gets made. And that choice makes all the difference. In the case of Mary, there was only one real moment in time when she had the opportunity to go as far as she could in showing how much she cared and how much she loved. And she did. In the case of Jesus, there's more than one moment. That first moment, though, was when he accepted the will of the Father and became fully as one of us, and yet kept the most important part of the image of the Father. And that was the will to do the Father's will. And that made all the difference. There's a big similarity and a big difference between the story of the Grinch stealing Christmas, what we're reading about here. Because there's trickery. The Grinch was out to fool them all by taking away. No, the Grinch was fooling himself to think that the only thing that gave the value to that time was all the food and all the toys and all the gifts. There's something bigger and better than all of that was going on. Just like there was something bigger and better that went on when Jesus was born in a manger. We can't see all that. Because from the hamster's perspective, they got no clue what we're like. From our perspective, we've really got no clue what God the Father is like, except as we've seen him through his Son and throughout the Word in the Old Testament and New. We see God's love, we see God's mercy, we see God's intention. Then it gets down to what we choose to do. Are we going to choose to accept the gift that's offered? Because there's a choice there. Or we can stand by and grumble and complain about the price. To grumble and complain that, well, the people that do that are the real losers of society that are just messed up. And I don't want to be like them. And the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees felt good about who they weren't. I'd rather be counted with Jesus than stand on my own goodness. Each of us has the opportunity to choose in faith. Faith that just like him, we can bank on the goodness of the Father, not just in what he's already done, but in what he will do, because he's shown us what he's willing to do through what he did in raising his own Son. If you need to take on Christ in baptism, or you need the prayers of the church, you're welcome to come as we stand and sing.